It is a pleasure to introduce to you tonight Patrick Roche. Patrick is an award-winning poet, performer, New Jersey local, Princeton grad, and mental health advocate. He is the author of the full-length collection, A Socially Acceptable Breakdown. It's a gorgeous cover, I think. As well as 2 chapbooks. The first called Wait 30 Minutes, and the second, An Exercise in Necromancy, which was winner of the Bowery Poetry Club's inaugural chapbook competition. He had a solo off-Broadway show, also called A Socially Acceptable Breakdown, that debuted in 2022, just in time for COVID, was a sold-out success, and then was featured in Broadway World and selected to be part of Dixon Place's Hot Festival. Patrick serves nationally as an ambassador for the JED Foundation, promoting mental and emotional health, suicide prevention, and substance abuse awareness. As an award-winning performer, videos of Patrick's work have amassed over 9.5 million views on YouTube, making him one of the most popular spoken word artists today. He has competed or been featured at multiple national and international poetry slam competitions and festivals, placing second at the 2017 Capturing Fire International Queer Slam, and placing third in the world at the 2016 Individual Poetry Slam Championship. As you can tell from his biography, Patrick obviously is a very successful spoken word artist and a tremendous performer. However, I believe there is much more to his work than simply performance. In my creative writing and literature classes, we often talk about art. Like, what is it? What is art? What's its role? And people often answer that it's a form of self-expression, or it's a way to create beauty, or it's meant to be provocative and make people think. And I think all of this is true, and all of this applies to Patrick's work. However, there are often people who say that the purpose of art rests in how it's perceived, in the experience of the viewer or the reader. That is, it is important in how art can reveal ourselves to ourselves, or even art can reveal something we did not know about ourselves to ourselves. And now Patrick's work tackles difficult subject matter, so also a potential trigger warning. I'm not quite sure what he's reading. It tackles the subject of suicide and suicidal ideation, struggles with depression, anxiety, eating disorders, alcoholism, abuse, and the shame and stigma associated with these things. There's a line in one of his poems that talks about, and I quote, singing the stigma into quiet submission. And I love that line because what I admire so much about his work is its fearlessness, its willingness to go there and share things that our culture so often wants to keep quiet. And it always makes me think about how alienating and lonely that is, to be told that a part of yourself should be kept hidden. And he tackles these things we're told not to share. And I don't think that his work and its relevance is limited to the topics he discusses. Like all really good art, it's not just about anxiety or feeling ashamed. I think most of us have something inside of us that we're afraid will be revealed. I think most of us have something inside of us that provokes shame. And I think Patrick's work so wonderfully argues for not internalizing the shame that our culture tells us we should feel, to just say, I'm not gonna do that, I'm not gonna feel that way. And if we can find the courage, as he has, to speak up, that it can be a gift to ourselves and also to others. So thank you, Patrick, for being here and for the gift of your work.
Hi, I'm Patrick. I will be reading some poems out of the book. I will be performing some poems that are in the book, and I'll be performing some stuff that maybe didn't even make it into the book that is either newer than the book or that I think lives most significantly in being present on the stage. But I'm going to start with a poem that is inspired by another writer, actually, named Jean Ann Verlee, who I would really recommend you all look up. She's got 3 collections. I have all of them, and they are among my favorite books of any style, any genre, anything. And she's a writer who is just really fearless in her poetry, is one of the best ways I can describe it. And this poem is inspired by her piece Brawler, and it kind of asks the question of, who am I? Who are you? Where do you come from? That type of poem, right? The self-identification poem. And in hers, it is all about what she is born of, what has created her. I decided to pose a question to myself as a prompt of, if you were to be the patron saint of something, what would that be? So this is canonization. Saint of the Meyer brain, saint of lost serotonin, of liquid neuron, of pills and their chorus of side effects, saint of a chorus, of singing the stigma into quiet submission. I did not plan on, I had already planned on reading this poem first. Saint of the quiet anxiety, of the off-brand panic attack, saint of attacking, of the bobcat making a claw-stricken den out of your chest, and of the territorial fight to reclaim a home from a predator, saint of the cold territory of home, saint of the warm territory of desire, of queer substance, of kissing straight boys, of acting straight, of being a bad actor, saint of bad habits and good movement of hands, saint of torn red cuticles and cracking knuckles when nervous, saint of red, saint of maroon, of burgundy, saint of knowing burgundy is your best color, saint of turning red, saint of seeing red, saint of seeing yourself as anything but yourself, saint of someone else, saint of self-discovery, of the self, of the good selfishness, saint of eating the last cookie, saint of the secret way in, of the hopeless meal, of the lost cause of anorexia, saint of nutritionist appointments, saint of chocolate milk and protein, of the steady expanse of gut, saint of the convex, of no more valley and no more sharp and no more lack, saint of more, of second helping, saint of seeking help, of seeking light, of seeking shade, saint of the wallet emptied at the drag show, saint of the sadness emptied from the body, saint of the not emptied body, of full stomach, of the brain full of crying and of joy, saint of the brain full of multitudes, saint of the blessing of full emotion and full love, saint of full, saint of yes, saint of no, saint of when I say so, saint of naming the want, saint of wanting and no shame, saint of the guilty pleasure and the pleasure with no guilt, saint of pleasure and the pleasing, saint of please, of time and always, always, saint of please, every time. Okay, so thank you. I'm going to jump into some performance work, which is where I got my start, really. And as with any spoken word stuff, feel free to be as reactive, as interactive as you want. Make noises if something touches you, if anything really catches your attention. You can snap, you can make noises like you ate some really good food or something. That's kind of like the go-to. I'm big into, I'll just be in the back of the room, like when somebody's performing a poem and you'll just hear, Like I will full on grunt in the back when there's a good line or something. But yeah, do whatever's natural for you. If you just want to sit and enjoy or listen, don't feel any pressure. But I think of my work as very much a dialogue and a conversation, or intending to start a dialogue and a conversation with people, right? So whether that's on the page, thinking I exist, intentionally thinking about a reader, I also on the stage think I'm intentionally trying to connect with an audience, and not just necessarily an audience I'm talking at or talking to, but an audience that I'm working with. So feel free to engage if you would like, but no pressure. This poem is not the first poem I ever wrote, but it's the first poem that I really tried to be open and honest and vulnerable in. And I thought I would kind of get tired of performing it, but it still holds a very special place in my heart because it kind of got me my start as a writer in learning what was important to me. And it allowed me to connect with people in ways that I didn't expect to be able to. So this poem is called 21. My father is run over by a car. He's passed out in the road with a blood alcohol content 4 times the legal limit. I do not cry. 4 months later, the nurses lose his pulse, and I wonder whose life flashed before his eyes, like rewinding VHS tapes, old home videos. 20. 19, I haven't brought a friend home in 4 years. 18, my mother sips the word divorce. Her mouth curls at the taste like it burns going down. 17, I start doing homework at Starbucks. I have more meaningful conversations with the barista than my family. 16, Christmas Eve, my brother and I usually exchange gifts, but this year he and my father exchange blows. My mother doesn't go to mass. 15, I come up with a theory that my father started drinking again because maybe he found out I'm gay. Like, if he could make everything else blurry, maybe somehow I'd look straight. 15, my mother cleans up his vomit in the middle of the night and cooks breakfast in the morning like she hasn't lost her appetite. 15, I blame myself. 15, my brother blames everyone else. 15, my mother blames the dog. 15, Super Bowl Sunday, my father bursts through the door like an avalanche, picking up speed and debris, banisters, coffee tables, picture frames. I find his AA chip on the kitchen counter. 14, my father's been sober for 10, 11 years. We don't even think about it anymore. 13, 12, 11, mom tells me daddy's meetings are for AA. She asks if I know what that means. I don't. 10, my parents never drink wine at family gatherings. All my other aunts and uncles do. I get distracted by the TV and forget to ask why. 9, 8, 7, 6, I want to be Spider-Man or my dad. They're kind of the same. 5, 4, 3, I have a nightmare, the recurring one about Ursula from The Little Mermaid. So I get up, I waddle toward mommy and daddy's room, blankie in hand. I pause. Daddy's standing in his underwear, silhouetted by refrigerator light. He raises a bottle to his lips. 2, 1, 0. When my mother was pregnant with me. I wonder if she hoped, as so many mothers do, that her baby boy would grow up to be just like his father. Okay, so thank you. I also often follow that poem up with the clarification or just the emphasis of that Ursula nightmare was a 100% true thing that hounded me from the ages of like 3 to 6. And I will tell you that story quickly to lead into the next poem. Basically, my grandma was watching me one day over the summer, and the movie theater in town was just showing, like, during the day, a bunch of Disney movies over the summer. So she's like, oh, it's great. I'm going to take him to the movies. We're going to go see Little Mermaid. And my mom is like, I don't think that's a good idea. You should not do that. She's like, what are you talking about? It's like mermaids and singing and like a Jamaican crab. It's probably fine, right? Like, that all sounds great. And she's like, okay, fine. If you know my kid better than I do, okay, sure. So we get there, and Ursula, especially, I mean, I was uncomfortable the second she popped up on screen, but especially near the end when she gets all of her power and she's gigantic and everything, I just booked it. I ran out of the theater. I was screaming. I was inconsolable. And my grandma calls my mom and is like, what's going on? Like, I don't understand. How could this happen? How did you know this would happen? She's like, well, the movie first came out when his older brother was 3 years old, and we tried to take him to see it 3 times, and every time he either ran out of the theater crying or wouldn't go in the first place. So I kind of thought it might be something genetic. I was just suspicious. So yeah, I don't know. For a long time, I was like, maybe she was just like really scary. Maybe she was just like too much woman for me. Maybe she was just like too strong, too whatever. I've since revisited Ursula and a lot of other characters that fit a similar mold, which is that of the queer-coded villain. It's a very common trope, especially in like Disney movies, but also in comic books, in live-action films. But for example, like Ursula, Jafar, Scar, Ratliff from Pocahontas, also like there are characters in like Bond movies and things, him from Powerpuff Girls, characters that are the villains and you're like, they seem a little bit gay. And it's a kind of long-standing shorthand way of conveying to an audience member, like, there's something abnormal, not right, and maybe disconcerting and or dangerous about this character, right? In Ursula's case, she is, and this is well documented, this is not just like conjecture or anything, it's literally stated, that she was greatly inspired in her design. The designers were greatly inspired by the drag legend Divine, who was one of the biggest names in the drag world in like 70s, 80s, lots of John Waters movies, anyway. And you look at them next to each other and it's like, oh, yeah, no, that's just Divine's face on this sea witch. So this is Ursula revisited. Only a queen could keep that many legs twirling. Only a queen could make a stage out of a dimly lit basement cave. Only a queen could enthrall an entire ocean, leave even the fishiest gasping for air. I had a visceral fear of Ursula. I ran screaming from the theater when she grew colossal, and I wonder how early a child learns that brand of hatred, what kind of fantasy is allowed to breach the surface, shrink and drown the budding queer, and how dare a queen claim what is hers? How dare a queen show her magic to an audience the size of the sea? How dare a queen serve and spin and sing and demand the most meager payment? Grant us a crown like that. Grant us our own Judys, flotsam and jetsam for dancers. Grant us a crowd shaking in awe, even if we have to make it ourselves. Grant us the divine and the body and, of course, the accessories, the necklace, the trident, the smoke, and the sparkle. I've been thinking about the queer-coded villains and the queer-blooded victims and the queer artists flocked by people hoping for magic and makeovers. As long as you don't get to be too much queer, too much witch, too much visible, too much laughing in the middle of the ocean and bending the waters around your abdomen, conducting the surf to a club beat. Some part of me must have known and ran from that theater wanting to keep that moment perfect. The fairiest happy ending. A smile painted across her face in a drugstore lip stain. Some part of me must have predicted it or had already seen it so many times before, how queer never lasts on screen, how it dies and the room cheers. But not that day. She lived and stayed, and the lightning was a spotlight, and the clouds were the fog machine, and the world could see exactly what she was, and it was glory, and it was loud, and it was hungry, and it was magic, and she was a queen long before she ever got the crown. Okay. Be cognizant of time here. Okay. Yeah, all right. So I'm gonna now do... let's see. Yeah, I'll do this next piece, which most of my work is rooted in, if not explicitly telling personal narrative, my own personal experiences, or if it's not, it's directly pulling from them, like the Ursula poem is very personal to me, even if it's not super explicitly, this is my biography. And initially, I was doing that out of necessity, right, to make sense of experiences I was having, articulate thoughts that I just couldn't quite make sense of. And then learning that doing so and sharing it with people could create connection made me realize the power that poetry can have, the power that art can have, the power that sharing stories can have. And I started to be more intentional about what the purpose and the goal of my work could be, or what certain pieces could be. So this was the first poem that I wrote that was really intentional about tackling mental health as kind of a rallying cry for getting people to address, acknowledge, and maybe dismantle the stigma surrounding mental health, and therefore combat all of the horrors and tragedies that it can bring about when it is otherwise treated as being very taboo and isolating. So this is, a little bit heavier again, but it again is like a really important piece for me. According to the World Health Organization, at least 800,000 people die by suicide each year. That averages to one person every 40 seconds. So statistically speaking, by the end of this poem, 4 people will have taken their lives. 1. This is not just another numbered list poem. This is a eulogy for those swallowed by their own minds. This is a call to arms, a call to speak. This is not family gatherings when I mention mental health and am told not to spoil the turkey, that it's uncouth, impolite, that it's better to stay silent. This is taking that silence and breaking it with my hands, with my teeth and tongue. This is people with mental illness banging our heads against the wall, not out of insanity, but to try to make some noise, to be heard. Too often we are ashamed. Too often we are in the shadows too. Suicide isn't always a banshee wailing against your eardrums. It is a child playing hide and seek behind your friend's smile. They can't hold its hand and introduce it to you. It is always invisible. Suicide is a lonely ghost desperate to give itself playmates. It's not a permanent solution to a temporary problem. These are rarely temporary problems. It is aiming for a good night's sleep after years of insomnia. Sometimes it's careful planning, drafting the note, inspecting your apartment for beams that can support your weight, or it's a flip switch given the right trigger or no trigger, painting a target on the highway divider, imagining the phone call my mother would get in the middle of a nap. Sometimes it is sudden. It is not always 3 arriving at the most convenient time, but the clock keeps ticking every 40 seconds. This is not a list poem. This is the tea kettle rising to a soprano screech, but you keep ignoring it to watch TV. It keeps whistling and crying, but you keep ignoring it. How much noise do I have to make? If we tell you we are suicidal, it can be a cry for help, but that is not a sign of weakness. This is not a sign of weakness. This is saying we're fighting, and we've been fighting with every weapon and fist we have. We've crashed against the cliffside, broken and splintered, but we're still fighting with whatever we can. I'm using my voice. It's all I have left. 4. Over the years, I had written different versions of my suicide note. On the nights I almost took my life, I always deleted or threw away the note rather than sending it or leaving it for someone. I assumed the words would just make them uncomfortable. If I was going to die, better to do it without all that fuss, better to do it in silence. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying in silence because of silence, but this is saying we can keep each other breathing. This is speaking louder than the stigma and hoping that someone will listen. Okay, so I want us all to take a second, right? And we're just gonna do a quick breathing exercise while I take some water. So I want you to think about something that made you smile, right? Just in the past week or so. It can be really minor, can be major, it can be a big life thing, or it can literally just be like I was walking down the street and a dog came up to me. It does not have to be anything super serious. And we're gonna do a deep breath in, and we're gonna focus on the inhale, right? And absorbing all that good stuff, right? Okay? So, deep breath in, and out. Okay, work. Now, we're gonna do the flip side of that and think about something that stressed you out. Again, it can be major, something that's really weighing on you, family, school, whatever, or it can be really minor, your shoe got a hole in it while you're walking somewhere. Again, does not matter. But we're gonna do another deep breath, but we're gonna focus on not just the exhale, but, well, you know what, for the sake of the sound, we will just do the exhale. But when you do it on your own, I encourage you to go full primal scream, which just lets it all out. But just do an exhale. We're going to focus on that and letting go of the bad thing, because I think it's really important in life, in my work, in anything, to acknowledge something that's difficult or bad or hard, but then learn how to move forward and release, right? Okay, so think about it. Take a deep breath in and just exhale and let that go for a little bit. Okay, awesome. But again, primal scream, don't cause a disruption or whatever, or do. I don't. Okay. I am now going to jump into, let's see, as I look at my set list and the time. Yeah, that'll work. Okay. This is a poem that I don't know if anybody here would know the song. I have a couple different pieces in this collection that are in kind of dialogue with or inspired by songs, pop music, whatever, because pop music is a big part of my life. So I wanted that to be present in my writing and be true to that. And I also just like the idea of engaging with different aspects of culture, pop culture, and whatever. So this one is after a Billy Joel song called "The Stranger." I don't know if anybody knows that, but basically the song is about like the masks that we wear or don't wear and what we choose to let people see or what they do see that we may not even recognize in ourselves, or the ways in which we change and don't recognize ourselves. And it starts and ends with a very haunting melody that is just whistled. And I will not do that right now, but Mom says she can't speak to me when I'm angry, that she doesn't recognize me. And we both know she means she recognizes me more than ever, just as another, a slow dance of ire kicking up dust and caking my skin, or rather the wildfire of inheritance cracking through my cheekbones. Turning into one's father is a stubborn erosion, but nothing fast, a measured crash of age. I carry my once self into the bathroom to analyze the evidence. I do not startle or break the mirror, nothing so dramatic. It's only a fledgling wrinkle taking root. Only a hairline losing its dexterity, falling back like this man's face could crawl up and cover my entire skull if given proper time. Only the portrait of my birthright and the sound of a man outside somewhere whistling a song I swear I've heard before. Okay, and now I'm going to get into a poem, which there is a series of these folks that were, there were a couple folks that I had the joy of and the privilege of being able to have some dinner with, and this type of poem came up. And there's a series of these in the book, which are contrapuntals. Basically, as if you can see here, there's what looks like 2 columns. You can read each column straight down as its own standalone section, and then if you read across line by line, it combines them and makes a third section. So there's a series of these in the book where one side is basically setting up or establishing a figure from mythology or from scripture or whatever, and then the other column is stuff from my own life, and then the combination shows how they inform one another. So this is dealing with Orpheus, who in mythology is the most talented musician and significantly tries to bring the love of his life, his wife Eurydice, back from the underworld by leading her out. And the deal is if he turns around before they get out of the underworld, she's gone forever. So this is Orpheus is my boyfriend. Section 1. Orpheus, a harp in his hands, lyrics teaching the dead to sing, he is a gentle kind of summer. Leading his love back from Hades with trust in his wake, he tries against logic, or at least hopes, not to look back at the ghosts. Section 2. Is my boyfriend happy? A trumpet of smile in spite of all my empty and sick, or is he uncertain steps, but only not leaving because he knows I will be afraid of my past and of the lonely hauntings to come? 3. Orpheus is my boyfriend. A harp in his hands, lyrics happy, a trumpet of smile, teaching the dead to sing in spite of all my empty and sick. He is a gentle kind of summer, or is he leading his love back from Hades with uncertain steps, but only trust in his wake, not leaving? He tries against logic because he knows, or at least hopes, I will not be afraid to look back at the ghosts of my past and of the lonely hauntings to come. Okay. So yeah, structure and form is a lot of fun. I encourage you to, in your own writing, if you feel like you're getting into a rut and like not really making much progress, or feel like you're writing a lot of similar things or things that you feel like are sounding repetitive, I'm a big proponent of prompts, whether that is a word, an idea, or if that's trying out a different style. It forces your brain to operate in a way that it normally wouldn't, and that can produce things that might surprise you. So I did a whole series of writing in that form. I also did a whole series of odes because I felt like, oh, I'm writing heavy poems. I know how to write sad stuff, but maybe that's not reflective of like where I am in my life anymore. So how do I not write a sad thing when that's all I know how to do? And forcing myself to do an exercise of, I'm just going to write a bunch of odes, poems that are optimistic and praiseworthy and glorifying something, and maybe that thing is something that I really like, and maybe sometimes that thing is something that I have struggled with, and now I'm learning how to see in a new light. So that's also an exercise I encourage you to take on. Now, as I get through to some more pieces here, I will actually do one of those odes, and then I will do some more performative things to close this out. Let's see here. There we go. So I have been on antidepressants for many years now, and they were very necessary. In addition to that, because I just wouldn't go outside, and also maybe like genetic predispositions, I have to take vitamin D. Because Lord knows I wouldn't not go into the sun otherwise. So this is an ode to vitamin D. What does it mean that I swallow a star every morning? What does that make me? Hopefully the kind of ancient god that chews on the heavens and spits out a new planet, even more flowers and children than before. Hopefully not the other kind of consumption, the black hole, the time bending backward. I swallow my antidepressants and follow them immediately with the vitamin D, waiting for their reaction to burst an aurora out of me. Oh, how the tourists will come flocking, and oh, how the scientists will measure the physics of me, and oh, how I will give the world new colors and new wonders, and oh, how some child will find me lighting up the sky one way or another. Okay. Oh, no! Okay, but it's very, actually, my phone just did that intentionally, and I will show you why in a second. One of the other things I do in my performance work is playing around with character and persona and voices. One, it's just like a fun exercise, and I would be speaking in like weird impressions and voices to myself and just like the four walls all day anyway, so why not combine that with my poetry? And two, it again allows me to kind of put myself through a mental and artistic exercise, like how would this character speak, or what would this say? And if it's maybe a person or a thing or an object in my life, how do I now understand an event or understand my experiences from that other perspective, right? Sometimes it's a way to step outside of myself and understand something from a different perspective. This was literally just me deciding I have a favorite animated film, a favorite Disney film, which is not The Little Mermaid, even though I have made big strides on that. It is Lilo and Stitch. So if anyone is unfamiliar, in Lilo and Stitch, Stitch, that little blue furry alien, he's been genetically engineered just to destroy and create as much havoc and destruction and mayhem as possible. Through a series of events, he ends up crash landing on Earth in Hawaii. And he learns over the course of the movie the value of softening, the value of family, the value of love, even if all of that is self-made or atypical. And in whatever small or fractured way it is, there's value in these things of family, of love, of togetherness, of just calm and being gentle, right? So this was me deciding I wanted to write a Stitch poem, and it became this. Stitch from Lilo and Stitch as my emotional support animal. And this is not even in the book. This doesn't really live much of anywhere because I should probably just, do a recording or something, but Stitch knows the brain bent on destroy and havoc. Stitch knows the panic rooted in a broken mind, a mind programmed for anything but happy and peace and love. Stitch also has a fear of the white coats. Sometimes the doctors are wrong, and it feels like you could raise a whole city to the ground to quiet the scream inside. Stitch was lost. Are you lost?
crashing in a strange land in your head. No more running or claws. Stitch knows you're scared people will think you are only built for the opposite of family. But you're not lost, or you're confined yourself. A panic attack is not a monster breeding shame out of your weak nervous system. It is your neurons straining to keep the family of your body together. Maybe your brain loves you so much it holds you as tight as it can when it thinks something is trying to end you. Stitch has seen the stars up close. Stitch has felt the sand in his toes. And there is nothing as bright or as soft as the breath you still share with this world and every world. Stitch's brain was a strange and stubborn child, and your brain is too. And it's not fair to hate a child for still learning. It's slow, but Stitch thinks family can help, even if family is just the gentle guiding hand of your pills. Stitch was scared of the ocean, yeah, kind of like depression, how it holds you under endless weight, drags you out in relentless tides, drags you across the rocks, how it's so filled with salt and violence and unknown predators. But you'd be surprised how many friends will surf you back to shore. And sometimes that's all it takes to ease the chaos. A friend, a small and smiling family, a sandcastle, and a good song. Stitch thinks your brain is getting better, but that doesn't mean it isn't already good and worth loving. Your brain has a glitch, but it's still yours and beautiful. It's little and broken, but still good. Yeah, still good. Okay, so now I think I'm gonna do like 2 more poems, and then we'll be able to open up to questions and hang out and talk and hopefully get you about the rest of your night. I wrote this poem, and this also was actually something that kind of came up with some folks at dinner, so I was glad that I had it on the set list. And it was grappling with my upbringing, where I had a religious Catholic upbringing, and then I kind of distanced myself from and fell out of that. But much of my family is still quite faithful, and I wanted to try to grapple with that and explore that difference and maybe understanding the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions behind some of that conflict, and come to a point of understanding and if not, agreeing on, at least knowing what is informing it all, which is, the love and the care in this case. So, in which my mother's prayers teach me about joy. I wait in line at the pharmacy counter to pick up the refills for my antidepressants, and prominently placed right next to the counter is a 5-foot-tall display of religious books promising a happy, fulfilled life through prayer. And I should have known that my mother would follow me in here like that. The pharmacist hands me the prescription and asks if I have any questions, so I ask her, "What does God look like?" And she says, "I'm sorry, sir, I'm just here to explain the medication." And I've never been more certain that God looks like these pills, each a daily communion I place on my tongue, ingesting salvation, each something I've tried to rid myself of, something that my mother has shamed me for abandoning. Every Christmas my mother asks me to join her at church. It doesn't have to be our church. We can try a different one, like Lutheran or a temple. Mom, I don't think they have Christmas Mass at a synagogue. Okay, well, now with that attitude, they don't. Once I stopped taking my medicine. Shame is a funny kind of thief. Every morning I would swallow the pills, but mostly just feel them a reminder of how far from healthy I still was. And I know I shouldn't be ashamed of depression, but there we were, me, and the shame, and the pills, and God maybe, and wouldn't it just be easier to forget all of those, flush them away? When I became suicidal again, I returned to the pills, but still not to God, and my mother learned about the months off meds, and she cried, and I took a prime position in her prayers once again, her supernatural wish for me to be happy against all logic.
And isn't that just like prayer, defying logic, defying the brain in a quest for joy? And isn't that just like these pills, defying the brain in a quest for joy, for some miracle? I'm trying to understand faith, but I'm scared of what that means, to have faith in a calm after pain, which is my hope in taking these pills. So maybe faith is a kind of happiness, faith as running into the unknown and believing that that unknown will be better and warmer. But hasn't that also been my hope when I've wanted to kill myself? So I'm afraid that too is just like prayer, or just like God, to be an uncertain relief even under a specter of death. My mother says she's worried that if I don't go to church anymore, I won't pray for her when she's old or sick, as she has done for me in all my sick, as she did for her own mother, whose brain betrayed her more each day. Today I took my antidepressants. I haven't missed a day. And I know my mother prays every night and reminds me to take my medicine, all she can do to help keep at bay whatever fresh hell hounds my brain. I don't understand prayer yet, or neurochemistry, and I'm not sure if I understand my mother, but I'm hoping to understand putting faith in at least one of these to prove me wrong, because wouldn't that be a miracle? Okay. So thank you all for coming out here and being such an amazing, receptive, engaged audience. I am going to close on this last piece, which is another ode, and then, yeah, if anybody has any questions after, I'm more than happy to hang around and talk and answer anything you've got, or just say hi. And then thank you all for being here. Thank you for having me. I've been very honored to be able to come here. So this poem starts with a quote by my favorite writer. "'Cause you make me feel like I could be driving you all night and I'll find your lips in the streetlights. I want to be there with you." Carly Rae Jepsen from her song Run Away With Me. She's the Call Me Maybe girl, but she's also like put out the best pop music of the past decade. I would fight somebody over that. I'll lose the fight because I'm small, but I'll fight you. So this is Ode to Streetlights after Carly Rae Jepsen. Because who among us hasn't found a lover's lips to be the gentle glow parting all shadow, in the kiss of the December city, respite from cement and iron and night, or in the soft rebellion of sex in a train station parking lot, awkward fumbling over seatbelts and suburban sweat, the streetlights, constant heat of defiance, slow dance silhouette, showcase spectacle of my boyfriend and me making a firework dance in our mouths on the corner, the streetlights, reason for my fears when a man sees us, but maybe also the reason for our safety. Hopefully the streetlights beacons of home and harbor. Come see how this dusty flickering lamp has room for us, holds us close, will not succumb to the blanket of darkness, will not sleep, will not be anything but loud and here. I'm afraid. My boyfriend and I walk back from dinner and stay on the well-lit path, but I worry that won't be enough. Still, I will not let this be the sad poem where I fade into the alleys or where my shadow becomes a more central character than me. No, this is a celebration of a mother's wisdom in a curfew of lamplight, of finding that same comfort and security in a boy's arms, of how he mirrors the wash of dim yellow soaking through the bedroom window. Hallelujah, to a sweet escape from the fear of a stranger's rage or from the midnight fog of my own sick mind. Hallelujah, to finding that escape wherever it may lie, in the warm breath of fluorescence or in the warm breath of a boy's palms. Either way, hallelujah to these little mimics of sun, small orbits of comfort. Hallelujah to the lighthouses on every corner and the light of a boy's eyes. Hallelujah to the streetlights painting the entire city into a map of my lover's face, to warm blood, or at least the joy of a queer love, or a small hope of safety for it, however meager. Hallelujah to running into that safety with a smile and feeling home, if only briefly, fighting back the dark and the depression and the hate and the cruel and the fear, if only briefly. Watch how this city cradles and kisses us in the lamplight, and watch me fight for that, for finding joy in whatever brightness may fall on us. Watch me fight, and watch me fight, and watch me fight, and watch me kiss this city back so hard it never stops shining. Thank you, Brookdale. I've been Patrick Roche.
I'm curious because these poems are not super long, but they're like long enough
Mm-hmm.
to like take a long period of time. Like, do you ever like knock them out in one sitting? Like, if you're in the zone, like, how do you, like, what's your process?
So it has varied a little bit. There are times when I've wanted to react to something or process something that felt really urgent and that I was really grappling with, so I needed to get something down. And sometimes I've been pleasantly surprised that, like, oh, this actually seems like a poem. And, you know, maybe I'll edit it a little bit, but it'll be pretty self-sufficient. And then there are other ones where I want to write about a certain topic or where I have a certain prompt or idea or concept or image in mind. And then maybe I'll have 2 lines here, 3 lines here. I would like to say that I'm very methodical and really work through everything and sit down and decide, okay, now I want to get 4 more lines done, or now I want to do whatever. I could benefit from being a little bit more like that. Usually, if it's not all coming out at once, I will have a few lines that I'll write down or a few images, and then it will just be knocking around in my head for like 3 days, and then I'll get it down. And when that happens, usually then, you know, I've gotten most of the things out that I want to say, but it still does take some editing. So yeah, there have been poems where it's been like one, just sit and put it down, but it varies a lot. And yeah, learning how to edit and revisit poems was challenging, but was made much easier when I could lean on other people to help me figure out what I was trying to say and how it was working or not. So yeah, it depends. If that, which is not a super definitive answer, but thanks, Sarah. Okay, great.
When you were at your lowest, what was the thing that kept you going?
In some ways, poetry was something that I found out of necessity because I was not doing so hot and I needed something to help me process things and get into a better headspace. After having like my first full-blown panic attack and not knowing what was happening to me and thinking I was fully dying, I then ended up, you know, starting some therapy, which helped me a lot. But then I feel like a lot of it was, some of it was, you know, it was a mix of things. So there was family, there was poetry, there was therapy. On just a day-to-day level, it was literally pop music. It was like, I am not doing so well, but I will put this album on and I'll be able to just like it'll force me into some sort of a mood. So on a like very just minute level, what could I do in the moment? That was one of the things, and that's why it holds such a special place in my heart too. But yeah, writing very much did, as cliche as it seems, have a huge role in like centering me, saving me, and keeping me grounded and in some sort of headspace where I learned as much with therapy and then also in the ways that I would approach my writing, how to like articulate thoughts. Because a lot of times when you're overwhelmed with stuff, it's really hard to find the words to even express and understand what you're feeling. So learning how to sit down and write those out, even if it doesn't become a poem or a story or anything, it helps get your thoughts into words, which that alone can make something more understandable, more manageable, and a little less scary and blob-like. So yeah, a few things is the answer.
So I wanted to know if you had like a different process that you sort of go through for writing page poetry as versus to performance poetry, because I know it's completely like different, you know, because performance poetry, you read it on a page and it's not as like powerful as if hearing you read it out loud. So do you have like a different process for those different kinds?
So there's a few different like kind of aspects of that. Part of it, to kind of go on to the last part and work backwards on your question, for pieces that I had always maybe performed and not thought about on the page before, that's been an interesting challenge to try to translate those onto the page and learn, okay, actually, maybe line breaks here would make a lot of sense or be cool, even if that's not where I take a pause when I perform it or something, because the effect while reading it might be a little different than when you're performing it. So one, there's been a whole other process now of like taking things because I started in performance and then kind of got more experience with writing and presenting poems on the page. That's been a whole process, kind of trying to adapt a performance-y piece or a piece that I understand most in performance to the page. I will say that even now when I'm writing something, if I'm trying to, like those contrapuntals where they're very much visual on the page, I still really operate by like hearing while I'm writing it. So even when I'm writing on the page, I'm still thinking about how something sounds. So that's still kind of where I default to and where my brain goes first. And I find that when I'm trying to write for the page, I do have to give myself more structure to force myself into that mode. I think I'm doing a little bit better now of kind of balancing the worlds and whatever. For performance, it can mean that I really do think about what is the tone I would have while I'm presenting this. Because it's something that I might be sharing multiple times over and over again, and there's going to be this very distinct personal, vocal, verbal aspect to it. I try to think like, what is the emotion or what are the emotions behind this piece? So then I can kind of get myself into the kind of voice I might be using when I'm performing it. But it's not as distinct as I think it used to be, as I've gotten more comfortable with the page. I was mostly just intimidated by the page, honestly, because I was like, I don't know how to do line breaks. I don't know what. But getting more practice with that made it a lot more manageable. And now there's not as much of a divide. But yeah, it was kind of give myself guardrails for the page, and for performance or things that I like writing a Stitch poem. Obviously, it's going to be mainly performance-y. It's knowing what is the emotion here, what is the character, that character might be me, how do they sound, how do they speak. And I often, for a performance-y piece, while the language will be like elevated and not exactly how I talk, I try to be true to the voice and the speaking patterns to some degree. But yeah.
Oh, hi, Patrick. I just wanted to ask a question. Have you ever found any hidden gifts or blessings, if you will, or in any of these afflictions? Like you had the one poem about the anxiety. It was kind of striking something in my mind, because we read a book, in the students I have here tonight, we read a book, it's about philosophies of healing. And she looks, the author of that book, her name is Susan Weed, but she says that oftentimes these terrible things, these enemies like anxiety or other things, can be used as doorways of transformation. They can be used to help us find wholeness in our life. And that poem that you read reminded me, I felt like there was a little of that. I just wondered if you had ever had any like hidden gifts from any of this, or obviously we wouldn't want it if we could say,
yeah,
hey,
absolutely.
Can I have some anxiety today? You know, but have you found anything in that for yourself?
Yeah, thing they get out of it, and myself included, that sometimes we have to like dial back, is a real kind of hyper awareness of the people around us and how they're feeling, how they're reacting to situations. And it can be really strong and really helpful, and it can really, like, you can be perceptive and empathetic, as long as you don't like internalize it and be like, oh gosh, I can't make one wrong step, or because this person might react in some way. As long as you kind of keep it in a healthy level, it can be a gift to be able to know this person is subtly but feeling a little type of way. Maybe I need to adjust sort of and match their energy, or maybe like there's something that I can help somebody with, or try to ask about, or just to know, like, this person, I noticed they're reacting this way, or like being able to kind of read a room. There's that. For as far as like anxiety and things like that, one of the interesting things was, and it kind of took my, it took a little bit of my boyfriend, now fiance, kind of articulating this to me one time, which was, he's like, you know, you have a lot of this like history of very kind of morbid ideation, and yet your anxiety is very much just like you're terrified of like being in any kind of danger or of death or of anything else. It's like very rooted in you're trying to live, you're trying to stay alive. So recontextualizing things like that as this is still not healthy, this is still not good, but it's actually maybe there is some deep part of me that has a survival instinct or whatever that might be. So that was one aspect of that. And then in general, like, this isn't so much anxiety, but like nerves as a performer or a reader or whatever. Just knowing how to like channel, like, oh, if I'm nervous, channel that into energy rather than into something debilitating. Yeah, so.
So I'm a little curious if you've ever hit scope creep with any of your ideas and how you kind of handled that.
I definitely have had like ideas or topics where I feel like I've written 8 poems about it and it still doesn't feel like it's quite the right poem or like hasn't worked out well. And that's where I have leaned on prompts or like, okay, you know what? I'm going to write about this topic or this idea. What if I write about it in a sonnet or in a whatever? That at least has, as I mentioned before, forcing your brain into like writing in a style or in a form or in any type of genre that is not your normal go-to, it really breaks you out of a mold and forces you to think in ways that you normally wouldn't. So that's usually what I'll do. Otherwise, I will say, okay, you know what? I'm going to let this sit for a few days, a week, weeks, whatever, and I'll revisit it later, because another thing that I run into a lot that feels like a wall is if I'm just trying to rewrite something about the same topic or the same idea over and over again, I feel like I just keep regurgitating the same ideas and I'm not coming up with new ideas. Whereas letting something sit, and this is a big thing with editing too for me, which is like I need to let something sit so that I can step away from it, think a whole bunch of other things, and then come back to it with kind of fresh eyes and maybe fresh ideas and thoughts. So yeah, either I will do a prompt of some kind of form or structure or whatever, or I will just sit and revisit it after a little bit of time away. Yeah.
What makes somebody a good writer, in your opinion?
Honesty. And that doesn't necessarily mean telling your own experiences and, being true to, but as long as you're being like authentic and honest in what you're trying to write. And that could be writing a fantasy novel that's not necessarily connected or rooted in your personal experience, but if you are approaching it and like, this is what I want to do, and if you feel like you are making progress on that goal at all, or at least producing something, that's a success to me as a writer. And really anyone who tries to write anything and writes something, even if you think it's a terrible draft that does nothing close to what you wanted it to, I feel like a writer is successful just for having written something, because that's a huge hurdle that people don't get over because they feel intimidated and don't want to try at all because they think they can't or that they won't be good enough. So just actually taking the step to write something, that in and of itself is a huge success to me as a writer. And taking that leap is pretty much enough that I would say that's the mark of a good writer, is taking that first step. Otherwise, always being willing to grow, always be willing to extend and experiment with, the scope of what you're writing or the genre or the style, and always feel like you're challenging yourself. And that can mean challenging yourself creatively, challenging yourself emotionally, challenging yourself in whatever capacity. I think that's always a good sign to me. So yeah. I don't have like criteria for when I read something. It's like, I like this, but also that if I don't immediately connect with something, I'm not like, oh, this is not a good writer. If the person is being honest and authentic and conveying what they want to convey or making progress in their creative process, that alone is usually enough for me to say that's the mark of a good writer.
This is a bit of an odd question, but if you had a word that you had to pick that's like significant to you, whether because of your experiences or you just like the word, what word would you pick?
I mean, I write a lot, especially now, about or trying to find my way to joy. So that comes up a lot for me, whether because it is in my experience or because it's what I want my experience to be. So I'm going to try to make my life approach that. That's one of the words that comes to me most often. And then, yeah, I don't know. Otherwise, I think I would go with, I don't know. I like camp. I like campiness and whatever. Yeah, for any entertainment, any art, drag, things like that. I'm a big sucker for camp because I like also art that is willing to not take itself too seriously, and is willing to be like over the top or whatever and not conform to something. So I also like that. But even though I don't necessarily think I give camp, but it's something I appreciate and like.
Do you have any advice for like new poets or somebody who needs to write poetry for class or something like that?
So don't feel any pressure to have what you write be a certain thing. That doesn't necessarily mean don't, meet the prompt that's given to you or whatever. But follow what feels natural to you initially. Later on, I would say, challenge yourself, explore things that feel challenging or that feel maybe a little bit at odds with your nature and your inclinations. But initially, follow what feels natural, follow what feels good. And if you're struggling to find something, do not be afraid to write very, write mundane, write every day, write, things, or find something that you enjoy and write about that. And again, that can be, I write plenty about pop music and Disney, and that's because I enjoy it, and it's something that is a big part of my life, so I want to be true to that. And then once you do write something, I've said it a few times, and I will always say that being able to kind of make that step, whether or if you're in a class, then that step is kind of taken for you to some extent, of finding a community of other writers. When you have like a community of fellow writers who respect each other, support each other, that is a really, really powerful tool in improving your own work, improving your writing, and just like trusting that these people are helping you and your work become the best versions of themselves that they can be. So yeah, be willing to trust is a big part of getting your footing as a writer. Trust yourself in what feels right, and trust other people that you admire and respect. Trust that they will also want the best for you and your work. So much. Thank you. Thank you all. Get home safe or wherever you're going. But yeah, I'll be up here. So.